Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of the What It's Really Like episode with Leigh Collins. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I highly recommend it because it'll give you all the context you need for today's conversation, but this is a little snippet of what you missed. Hello, and welcome to What It's Really Like. I'm your host, Molly Burke. Today, I am joined by Leigh Collins, a survivor and advocate who literally lived every woman's biggest fear. In 2018, Leigh was living a normal life in Santa Monica until one Thursday night, everything changed. She woke up at 3 a.m. to her dog barking,
and I looked up from my phone and saw a shadow lean into the doorway and then lean out.
As she entered her kitchen, she found a man standing there with a knife. What follows is an account of a terrifying home invasion where every second counted.
He had me with the knife on the couch, and he said, "Do you have a boyfriend?" And I said, yes, and that question made me nervous.
She was face to face with a predator who told her that he was going to kill her. But in that moment of absolute terror, something inside her shifted.
A wolf in a trap will chew off its own leg to survive. Its survival instinct is that strong, and so is mine. I jumped down in between him and the wall and started to attack.
Today, Leigh walks us through that harrowing 13-minute struggle. We discuss the incredible power of the female body under threat and how she tapped into a strength she didn't know she had.
What I learned in my story is that I had no preparation. I had no self-defense skills. I had no idea that this was coming. And my body's ability to fight was so much stronger than anyone had ever told me.
This is Leigh's story about the night she chose to fight back. Stay tuned. Now, Leigh is going to walk us through the aftermath, rebuilding her life, and getting justice. At what point did you come to learn that this person had been stalking you previous to his attack?
I learned that he had been stalking me. I think it was it was kind of, there were clues that led to that over several years. But the first thing that happened was, I think it was July of that year. This happened in February. July of that same year in 2018, the detective on the case called me, and he said the DA's office received a letter. I think it was like a 7 or 8 page letter written by someone who knows the man who attacked you. They had found him and arrested him at this time, and so he was in custody. And this person knew him and had written a letter to the DA's office saying, he's admitted to me that he's done this before. He told me about the woman in Santa Monica, and he told me that he's been watching her for quite some time. I didn't know that part yet, but I knew this letter existed. And the detective called me and said, I have some questions for you. There's this letter. We're going to talk to him right now where he's being held. And first question was, were you going to a party that night? And I was like, no, I went and got my hair cut and got in bed and went to sleep. And he said, okay. Next question was, I think, do you know the artist Nipsey Hussle? And this was before Nipsey Hussle died. And I said, I know of that artist, but I don't know him. And I still don't know the significance of that question. And so then the third question he said was, have you ever been to Arizona? And I said, yes. When I first moved to California, I was dating someone, and his family had moved from Wisconsin to a little town in Arizona. So in 2011, when we first moved to California, we had visited this little town in Arizona to visit his family. Like, I think 2 or 3 times I bought my car there, and he got really quiet. And he was like, what was the name of the city? And I said, I can't remember. It's something like Happy Arizona. And he was quiet. And he was like, well, call me if you remember anything else. And so at that time, with where my PTSD was at, I was going to the movies almost every day. It helped me with coping, just being in the movie theater. And so I went to the movies like I did almost every day. And I was just in my head in circles, like party and Nipsey Hussle, and like, what about Arizona? And after the movie, there was like this little wine bar outside of the movie theater, and I went and sat there, and I was drinking a glass of wine, just in my head, like, okay, what do I? And I remembered the name of the town, and it was Surprise, Arizona. And I Googled the guy's name and Surprise, Arizona, and he had an address in Surprise, Arizona from 2010 to 2011. And then in the fall of 2011, moved to Los Angeles. And so I called the detective, and it was like 11:30 at night. And I was like, it was Surprise, Arizona. And I think he lived there. And I, blah, 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 just like, I'm piecing all of these things together. And he was like, I know. I'm glad that you came to it on your own. I can't let you read the letter yet. We're going to probably use it in court. But yes, it's looking like he had been in Surprise, Arizona. You have ties to Surprise, Arizona. I need the names of everyone that you spent time with there and the name of the car dealership and things like that. So, and he did tell me at that time that there was another woman that was mentioned that they were looking into, and that he had admitted to this person that he had done this in Surprise to another woman. So over the years, I didn't know what that meant. It was like, okay, 7 years between when I was in Surprise, Arizona and this attack. He was 25 years old when he attacked me. That would make him 18 when maybe we crossed over in Surprise. Like, this is so surreal, and it doesn't feel real. Like, I'm just rejecting this as a possibility, just as a coincidence. And then when the trial happened in 2021, or end of 2020 into 2021, through all of the video evidence, photo evidence, jail phone calls, and then ultimately finally getting to read this letter, I don't have like a an admission from him in writing where he's saying on record that he did this. But with all of the different pieces at play, it looks like at some point he and I had a crossover in Surprise, Arizona in 2011, and he lived there with his sister. And then he moved to Los Angeles and attacked me in 2018. And that night, they have security footage of him hanging around outside my apartment, I think from like 8 p.m. And he was carrying a big backpack full of clothes, which they think was like he had planned to bring a change of clothes that he had stashed outside of the apartment before he broke in. And he was hanging around that night from 8 to 3 when he did break in. And there were all these Metro passes of him having come to Santa Monica. And it's one of those things that I've looked into, like, do I go to where he's in prison now, because he was sentenced to life in prison in California? Do I go visit him in prison and ask him outright, like, were you stalking me? In the letter, it says, you were following me for quite some time. We have this thing in Surprise. Was it at the car dealership? What is it? Like, do you just meet me there and it's 7 years passed and you cross by me again? Like, why, what is the story? I want to know so badly. I know he probably won't tell me the truth because I've now spent more time around him through the trial. And I know he'll probably just play games. And potentially it will spark more interest and make it a more dangerous situation somehow, even though I know he can't leave the prison, which I almost would be fine with, just to know. And I've also thought about hiring like a private investigator. But I don't know if I can go the rest of my life and not know exactly what happened. It's like, it seems this way, but it also seems so unfathomable for someone to follow someone for 7 years, to move states. It's also unfathomable to think of someone wanting to break in, hold you at knife point, and rape and potentially kill you. Like there was also that night he stole a car key, or a car key, I should say, went missing from my apartment. So the police were saying there's potential that he was going to move you to a second location. It's just like there's so many unanswered questions that, because I'm somebody who just doesn't see the world that way, feels so unfathomable. But that's what it looks like, and that's what the police told me I should take seriously as far as what I should be prepared for if he ever were to be let out. And also in this letter, the person described that he becomes very quickly obsessed with women that he comes into contact with. Like in jail, I guess he was getting into trouble because he was getting it before the trial. He became obsessed with his defense attorney and was saying that he wanted to marry her and coming up with a life that they were going to lead together. And she kept saying to him, like, this is all a fantasy in your head. I'm here to defend you. And ultimately, she got so frightened of him that she had to recuse herself. So he's like a chilling individual. But it's also just mind-boggling to me.
I can understand how earth-shattering, like how reality-bending the idea of somebody in some way watching you for 7 years
Completely.
in moments that you felt safe.
Doing nothing. Yeah.
And how it would feel like all of these times I felt safe
Are robbed.
are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand wanting that closure to feel like, can I reclaim those 7 years as being as safe as I felt? Or do I have to feel this violation for those 7 years I existed?
Exactly. It's like repainting my memories as not happy memories where I'm out in the yard reading a book with my dog or having friends over or watching TV on the couch. Suddenly now it's repainting all of those memories as being hunted. And that used to really scare me. And I think now it makes, like, the feeling I feel right now is anger. Like it's changed over time that it's less that I'm like paralyzed by fear thinking about it and I just don't want to think about it. And now a lot more that I'm angry, if that is the reality, that he took away all of those happy memories and repainted them as hunter and prey. I don't know. Yeah. It's a weird feeling.
Of course, the other thing that learning those details unlocks is that 10 p.m. moment, right? When you said,
Exactly.
oh, he left at 10 p.m. and your attacker immediately knew, oh, no, she's lying because I was watching for 7 hours waiting for my moment. I want to step a little bit back from things like the trial and the discovery of these different details. When you were in the hospital, what was the extent of the injuries? And what did the beginning of recovery look like?
So the injuries, once the firefighters I have stayed in contact with and went to the fire station and brought them food, just was so thankful to the firefighters because they were so gentle with me in the minutes after this man was still running away, like had just run away from the house. And I was shaking and I didn't know what had happened. And they explained to me where I was cut and asked for permission to touch my body. And one of the firefighters rode with me to the hospital in the ambulance. And I was asking him in the ambulance, am I going to die because of how much blood I saw? And he said he got choked up and he said no. And I wasn't sure if he was lying. And I said, it's okay, you can tell me. I just want you to tell my mom that I love her if I'm going to die. And he said, no, you're not going to die. Like, you've lost a lot of blood, but you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. And then when we got to the hospital, they they brought me into the ER, and that was scary. And I've talked about that. Obviously the doctors and nurses are there to help you, but coming from what I just came from, which was like my body being hurt by a stranger in the dark, and then being in the ER, it was so bright, and there were so many people, and there was so many machines and energy and touching my body. And they were explaining to me too, like, we're cutting off your pants, or we're cutting off your shirt, or we're going to touch you here where they could. But mostly it was this like halo of nurses at my head that kept me from, my brain really wanted to float away at that time. And these nurses were kind of keeping me grounded and keeping me there, which I'm thankful for, because I still hadn't given a statement or anything. But in the hospital, as I was experiencing, what it means to go into the ER, and I am going to be okay, and they're helping me, and I'm going to survive, I learned that, my two fingers had been almost severed. The firefighters told me that they call that a distraction injury. So I got so obsessed with my two fingers and was just like, are we going to put him on ice? Are we going to put him in milk? Are we going to reattach him? And almost couldn't see anything else, which they were like, that's a good thing. And we kind of used that to keep you distracted, that you're just looking at these fingers, because you were very focused on the fingers. But in the hospital, in the ER, I saw, because they were kind of taking me from room to room to get scanned and things like that, that I had the two fingers that had been almost partially severed. And I kind of have like cuts that go down my palm, and you can see they were able to reattach my fingers, but I can't really feel them. And they're kind of stuck in a curled or clawed position. Um, and I have, what else? I have like a 7-inch stab wound in my forearm on my right side. I have like a 5 or 6 inch stab wound in my kind of like tricep outer arm on my left side. And then my elbow was cut really badly, like down to the bone. And these were all defensive wounds when I was holding my arms up and he was slashing at me, and would have otherwise been my face and neck. So I'm very grateful to my hands and my arms. But my elbow was cut down to the bone. And so that was just kind of like raw and exposed. And my ulnar nerve was severed in that cut. And then I was stabbed twice in the head. So I think all in all, it was 7. 7 is like a consistent number in this story for whatever reason, but I think it was 7 times that I was stabbed. And nowhere in like my like midsection or like my neck or my body. It was all concentrated in my head, arms, and hands. And I went through that morning, I think like an 8-hour surgery, and had given my statement to the detective right before. And from there, I was kind of going through like physical therapy wherever I could, trying to get my fingers back. Once I was able to I was in a really big cast, like a full arm cast, for I think a month and a half, maybe. No, not that long, maybe a month. And then was doing physical therapy, trying to get my fingers back, but they're pretty much just permanently damaged. And then my ulnar nerve was reattached about 6 months later because they missed it in the ER. So I have dimmed sensation in my left arm from the elbow down. But all in all, I adapting to that was absolutely the easiest part, like that. There's nothing, I'm held back by nothing, because that's the new me, and that's how we're going to do things, and we're going to do things differently. I had some feelings of like a panic attack, I would say, like maybe 4 or 5 months out from the attack, where I think it was just grief about the changes to my body a little bit, that I my pinky specifically would feel like claustrophobic because I can't get it. They call it like burn skin that burned or that grew back. So the skin, it wasn't enough skin for my pinky to extend fully. So it kind of feels like it's in like a little jacket. Um, but I but I remember having feelings of claustrophobia, like wanting it to just go straight. I just wanted to go straight. Just it's stuck in this little jacket, like straight jacket, and I can't get it right. And now I kind of joke that my pinky is like curled up to its big sister, which is my ring finger, which is also just kind of stuck in a 90-degree position. And I went to like a body healer, I think 5 years ago, that said you should adorn that part of your body in diamonds because that part of your body saved you, and that part of your body bore the brunt of survival for you. And so I bought a little pinky ring that has a diamond on it, and I always keep it on. I've lost this ring probably, like I've gotten like 3 replacements for it. But I really loved that sentiment of, because I had gone through periods too of hiding that part of my body subconsciously, like hiding my hand and hiding my arm. And I had a guitar teacher that I went to in high school that saw some pictures of me on social media, on Facebook or something. And he's an amazing guitar player, but he has a hand that only has 2 fingers on it. And he pointed out to me, sent me a Facebook message and said, I think I'm seeing in pictures that you're treating that part of your body differently and almost like acting like it's separate from you. And he said he went through something similar with his hand and his arm being different than the rest of his body. And he just said, you need to work on treating that part of your body with more love and care and reattaching it to yourself instead of hiding it. And I was really thankful that he reached out and said that, because I hadn't connected those dots yet. And it is a conscious thing for me that like I do treat my hand on that side. I try to be conscious to treat that part of me with care. Because it is, there's grief there, but there's also gratitude, and there's also like, it's almost like it's the central point of this second chapter of my life a little bit.
Both the story of the healer and the story of that guitar teacher are so beautiful, because I could imagine that these injuries and the way that they've changed your body feel like a constant way in which he will always have impact on your life.
Yes, and like control.
And so it's beautiful to try to find ways to reclaim that if it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
How can we heal these parts of ourselves and change the narrative to take back our own power?
Exactly.
And I think that's really beautiful.
That's so well said. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
When I was 20 years old, I had a workplace accident where I walked off of a 5-foot stage, full speed. And I physically injured myself, but I often reflect on the fact that the emotional injury was much worse. That was the first time I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. And I took a medical leave. I ended up quitting that job and kind of rewriting my whole life after that. And it sounds like a very simple accident, but of course it was more so the trigger that brought up a lot of other things around that.
Yeah.
I think for me, it brought up, feelings of, I had always felt confident navigating as a blind person in the world, and my orientation mobility and that kind of idea was shattered by this accident that, I'm not as safe in the world as I thought, and just all these other things. And I think it really resurfaced previous PTSD that had gone untreated from
Mhm.
previous accidents and situations. And so for me, it was kind of this very long healing process emotionally. And in ways, even though it's been over 10 years, I still have those little things in me. Um, I know that you've been very outspoken about navigating PTSD for yourself as well following the accident. Outside of the physical healing, when you left the hospital, what did rebuilding your life look like after that?
I well, I always say that like the fight for me was the easy part. And it's the like the home invasion to me is the most clear cut as far as I understand. Of course, it's not something that I understand in the sense of like I condone it, but it's something that I can understand. A stranger broke in, a stranger wanted to hurt me. We fought. We he ran away. He's in jail. There's so many things about it that I think are clear, understandable, and there's physical repercussions in your body and, like uh, triggers that I'll have as far as like hypervigilance and things like that, that will always stay with me as a result of that experience. Or maybe not always, but they're part of my experience. But the aftermath with the like learning how to exist in the world after something like this happening, and then the reception that I got from the relationship that I was in, from friends, from people in my life, the confusion about my behavior, from people in my life that didn't understand or couldn't connect. Like there was an example of I was at dinner with some friends or out to drinks, and this was maybe 2 months after the attack. I like didn't have a place to live. There were so many things going on, but we were out having drinks together, and something got brought up and I stood up and ran out of the restaurant and just was running military style down the street. And it was a flight response, like a very extreme flight response that I didn't realize at the time. And then I went and sat in an alley and was like, what just happened? What just happened? What just happened? And like couldn't understand this extreme response, but I knew it was from the attack. The people I was at the dinner with were saying, why are you acting so immature? Why do you need so much attention? And then some of the girls I was with were saying, she just experienced this happening. Like, how are you guys not connecting that her behaving that way is connected to a trauma? And so I think just surprises like that in people not really understanding how this impacts a human being, and myself not knowing, like I had no idea what I would be facing as far as PTSD and how that would show up and what would be struggles for me after this. And I think that was the primary reason for me wanting to share this story. Of course, I want women to feel prepared and not afraid when it comes to, like the potential of having to face someone in a home invasion or if you're ever attacked out in the world. I want women to know that fight is on the table, but I also felt so lost and lonely after the attack, experiencing PTSD in what felt like isolation. And I have a huge family in Wisconsin and I have friends, and I could not have gotten through this experience without the support of love, and love from friends and family. There were characters in play at the time, including the man that I was dating at the time, that made it very confusing, um, to to understand what my new reality was, to understand if I was good or bad, if I was doing it right or doing it wrong. And I would definitely say the aftermath and navigating that was 10 times more challenging. And I would face this man in my apartment in a physical fight 10 times over to not experience the mental and emotional and relational side of things that came afterward. And of course, I'm so proud of who I am today, and I feel very grateful to have experienced those things and have spent a lot of time working through them to trust people and feel relaxed with people. But I do have an element, I think, that I am frightened of people and intimacy and friendships and relationships coming out of that experience that I'm working through now, where it's so much more clean cut. Like a stranger breaks in the house and hurts you, and you didn't know him, and that's understandable. But then someone in your life, especially a romantic partner, kind of treating you with unkindness after something like that, or leaving you after something like that, or manipulating your reality after something like that is so much more confusing. And the betrayal from someone you love and trust hurts so much more and has such a lasting impact in a way that has been so much more difficult to navigate than the physical attack itself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I can very much relate to that, and I can relate to your body and your brain doing things that you don't understand, and other people struggling to understand them. I remember feeling like my mind and body were betraying me
Yeah.
when I was going through the thick of my PTSD
Yeah.
and anxiety, and I had a lot of OCD tendencies, and
Same.
that was like definitely obviously how I was trying to cope was through creating these like
Comfort
comfort
and
rituals and
repeating
these
things.
cycles
Yeah.
and focusing all of my thoughts and my brain on that.
Yes.
And that was really hard for people in my life to understand.
Yeah, it's like you look like a crazy person.
And I didn't understand it.
No.
All I
Yeah.
knew is it's all consuming in my head, that's what I'm supposed to do and think about. And so I completely can relate to that. And um, not really being able to like reconcile for yourself. And therefore it's hard to describe and explain to others
Mm-hmm.
what's going on.
Completely. Yeah. And that when you were saying that you had so much confidence until this incident happened, and then it shattered that idea for you, and you almost had to have a reckoning within yourself about whether or not you can be as confident as you thought you were going to be, or as you thought you could be, or can navigate the world in the ways that you thought that you could. How long was that? Did you kind of have a down period where things were really tough, or was it like you were always functioning, but in private you were really struggling?
So I firmly believe that I actually developed PTSD around 8 or 9 years old when I had my first life-changing accident where I ran into a fence and I split my face open. And from that day on, I had to use a white cane.
Oh my God.
And that entirely changed my life because all of a sudden, as this young girl, I had no choice in using the cane. It was forced upon me, obviously for good reason, but I didn't understand because I still felt like I could see.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to use this white cane, which now publicly identifies me as different,
Right.
as disabled, which therefore had the ripple effect of everybody everywhere always treating me differently.
Yeah.
And so from that night on, I had insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would literally just pace around my parents' bedroom all night
Mm-hmm.
for months. And I couldn't get up and go to school because I had been awake all night and I would only go to sleep when it was light out. And my family, I think this is, back in like 2003, 2004 kind of time frame. And so things were just very different with mental health, especially with children. I think we thought of
Okay.
PTSD as something that happens to soldiers.
Only, yeah.
We didn't realize that it was something that can happen to anyone for any kind of traumatic event. And so they were seeking a lot of help for me, but that looked like getting, a 2-day sleep study in a hospital and like doing all of these external other things. And I dealt with like a lot of nausea. Like I couldn't eat because I was so nauseous, which
is a manifestation of PTSD.
exactly. I now know, having formally been diagnosed, these are always, for me, my PTSD manifests very physically.
Same.
So that was kind of my experience then, which again, in retrospect, I understand what had happened. But following my actual, the accident that re-triggered this all, and it's what's interesting about it is essentially it's the same kind of accident, right? Like it's an accident related to my mobility and my ability to navigate without sight in the world. And both times I was not using a mobility aid. And so it kind of resurfaced for me in an even bigger way. Not only dealing with physically, like I lost a lot of weight. I could not eat. I was extremely nauseous. Anytime I would try to get on stage, I would have like crazy diarrhea. I know that's TMI, but just my body, like the anxiety, the adrenaline would just, and I was never somebody who dealt with stage fright really, because that was my job. I spoke on stage all the time. It was actually always somewhere where I felt the most myself and the most present. And so to have this, now I couldn't understand, like, what is my body doing? Why am I feeling like this? And eventually being diagnosed, unfortunately, getting the diagnosis unlocks, oh, this is what's going on. This is why I'm having all these things. But it doesn't automatically heal you, right? And one of the other big symptoms for me was an inability to follow my thoughts.
Okay.
I don't know if that's relatable for you, but I'd say it's almost like a thought would start and halfway through the sentence, it would fall off a cliff.
I experienced something similar in that I would say there would be things, I would be thinking about something and then it would go behind a door. That I would say, like, and I'm trying to open the door, but the doorknob feels slippery.
Yes.
Something like that.
It's like this inability. You're like, I knew I was going somewhere and I have no idea. It's gone.
It's been stolen.
Just completely gone for me. I would have, if I would get on stage, I would have this irrational sensation of falling, or like this sensation that if I took a step backwards, I would fall down a hole. Even though I was very consciously aware that that was not possible. And that didn't make sense. Like it was all very strange. And even though I understood that none of this makes sense, my body did it anyways. And my brain did it anyways. And it was compounded because my guide dog, my first guide dog, passed away very unexpectedly in the throes of my healing. And that kind of spun me in a whole other out of control direction. And for a very long time, I was completely non-functional. It's the most non-functional I've ever been with my mental health. I not only couldn't eat and was rapidly losing weight, but I couldn't leave the house. I would have at least 3 panic attacks a day. I was just not a person. And it took, a combination of talk therapy and cognitive behavior therapy and medication to start to rebuild and get my brain chemistry. To me, the biggest unlock for me was medication. In a way that no therapy was cutting it at that point. And that was my therapist who had seen me through so much previously, so much depression and suicidal ideation and all these other things that I'd gotten through with therapy. That she was like, Molly, like, I think your brain chemistry, like, it's too far gone. Like, you just need medication.
To pull you back.
And honestly, I remember my doctor telling me, like, it's going to take probably 30 days. Within 24 hours.
Really?
I started to feel like a person again.
Wow.
And it was incredible. Like, it really was.
Did you feel relief? Like, were you very numb emotionally numb at that time? Or were you terrified? Or were you stuck in shame? Or
I couldn't.
Feeling?
I was so scared to take the medication
Yeah.
because I remember my doctor telling me that it might cause nausea.
And you're like,
And I was like, I'm already nauseous all the time. I already can't eat because I'm so nauseous.
Yeah.
And I have to eat to take this medication, which might make me nauseous. Like, I
Right.
was like literally in such a spiral that the idea of even taking the pill
Yeah.
was like so hard for me. And I can remember my mom, who's like my rock star and like my ride or die and always so supportive of me, just like getting so upset with me that I wouldn't just take the pill
Yeah. Yeah.
because she just saw me wasting away.
Mm-hmm.
And like, she saw that months earlier I had been this thriving person living on my own in downtown Toronto, traveling the world, like living my dream. And now I'm literally like curled in a ball on the bathroom floor.
Can't move.
And I can't move.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm erratic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not rational in my behaviors
Mm-hmm.
in doing these like very, routine things. And she could just see like I'm imploding.
Yeah.
And I think it was so hard for her to watch that and feel so helpless.
Definitely.
And honestly, I think I loved her enough that I took it for her more than I took it for myself because I saw how the dissolving of my life was impacting
It was killing
my
her.
loved ones.
Yeah.
And I just was like, okay, I'll just take it. And I took it before bed so that way I could take a sleeping pill.
Yeah.
And if I was to get nauseous, it was in the night and I would sleep through it.
Yeah.
Because taking a sleeping pill is the only way I could get sleep.
Because of the OCD?
Just the anxiety. Just the adrenaline in my body.
Yeah.
And I think that was the start of thankfully my healing.
That's really, I do think, I have a similar experience with my mom and her being there for me and helping me through this time. And she is fierce in her own way. And she was my angel that helped me through this in a lot of ways. She lived in Wisconsin, so she stayed in LA as long as she could. But I think I had a similar experience in the sense that, like, even if you can't see it for yourself, your mom can still see it for you. And you feel this symbiotic connection that, like, what's happening to me is happening to her in some ways. And I remember there was a point when my mom flew back out to LA when I was getting to a point of non-functioning. And I was laying in bed and I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sleeping. I was probably sleeping like an hour or 2 hours a night. Going to the movies, like I said, I was walking in circles and repeating things to myself. And I had lost probably 20 pounds because I would only eat Triscuit crackers. And I didn't want to eat. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking I looked like a ghost and thinking I wanted to kind of disappear. And I'd never experienced disordered eating or anything throughout my life. But, all of these, so I was like, I was suffering and I was fading. And I remember my mom like kneeling down by the bed. I was just laying in bed, kind of staring at the wall, comatose feeling. Just in my mind, for me, it was like rumination and thoughts. And I described it as like 10 trains going on different tracks on top of each other at the same time and looping and looping and looping and looping, trying to figure this out. What happened here? What happened there? What happened here? What happened there? How do I fix it? How do I fix it? How do I make it go back? I just want to go back. I would repeat all the time. I just want to go back. 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 And my mom kneeled down next to the bed and looked at me and she said, I need you to fight. Like, I need you to get mad. And you can't give up. I was stuck at that time in despair, and I was stuck in that time in fear, and I was stuck in that time in, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. And I want to go back. It was like I was rejecting everything about it, and I couldn't take a step forward. And it was killing me physically and mentally. And after she said that, I had something that I had to fight for. And I also struggled with SI at that time. And I remember calling the suicide hotline and talking to someone on the phone for hours in my car in the middle of the night. And they were so kind and they were so gracious. And it's just, the compassion of others. And like you said, you have had in your life to have to depend on other people and trust other people. It was, I'm not a religious person. And I know I've brought up God a few times in this conversation, but after the attack, the way that there were people that were hurtful and there were people that were making it more difficult, certainly. But the way that the majority of the people in my family, in my friends, in my community showed up and wouldn't let me fall felt like what I can only describe as God, because it felt physical. It felt like, my high school choir teacher called, and like the community, in Santa Monica, there were a bunch of women on Facebook that put together like what's it called? Like a meal delivery sign up sheet. And they were trying to reach people to send me food. And, it was like people were offering to help me with the dog. People were offering, every single person I've ever met in my life was offering to help. And the outpouring of love and support and compassion was tangible, and I could feel it, that when human beings gather around someone with this much energy of support, they will physically not let them fall or fade. And that to me was something that I will never forget that. Like I'll be on my deathbed and I'll be able to remember that feeling, because it was like, this must be what people are talking about when they talk about God.
That's such a gift and such a blessing that you had that support network around you to help uplift you when you could not lift yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that thankfully in your case, the police were also a part of that support network and pursuing prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
How did they eventually find your attacker, and what was your journey to getting justice through the legal system?
So they ended up arresting him I think he was at a probation meeting that Monday. He had left his fingerprints. He had thrown the knife when he ran away, and they found it, and his fingerprints were on the knife. His fingerprints were all over my apartment, and he was in the system. He had also left, obviously, blood. And then when we fought in my bedroom, he had left credit cards. There were some of his credit cards and some that were stolen, and his cell phone. Like all these things fell out of his pocket when we were fighting. So they, over the weekend, were able to say, this is the guy from the fingerprints and all of the evidence that he left behind, even though the DNA took longer to process. So they arrested him at this probation meeting
So he was already on probation for previous crimes?
Yes, which I think was mostly around like breaking and entering and theft. Nothing. He had not been arrested and prosecuted, to my understanding, for any violence against women, unless that happened in Arizona, which I've looked into and haven't been able to find. But he was arrested, and they took him to jail. I think he was on $1 million bail. And so he wasn't able to put up bail. And so he stayed in jail the whole time, which put me at ease. But still, the police said, don't get photographed outside of the house. Don't make yourself visible. They said, don't go back to the apartment. Because he could have people on the outside that would intimidate you or try to silence you or hurt you. So that, I was adamant about wanting to go back to my apartment, because I was like, it's my apartment. I didn't make the decision to leave. he's not going to make me leave my apartment. No, why do I have to move just because he did this? But then we tried to stay there, me and my mom and my stepdad and my then boyfriend one night tried to stay there, and I stayed up. They all fell asleep, and I stayed up all night imagining how I was going to try to protect them when someone broke in, and replaying just like, I'm going to move so slow because I'm in a cast. I'm not going to be able to protect them. I'm not going to be able to fight, but just couldn't sleep. But so ended up moving to a few different places and then finally finding a new apartment. And over the span of, I think, 2 years, there were a lot of instances where like his defense attorney recused herself, like I mentioned. So then he had to get a new defense attorney. She recused herself because he had become obsessed with her and she felt uncomfortable. So then he had to find a new defense attorney. So that kind of started the clock over and caused delay. Then they were pushing hard for a plea deal, which I think they were talking about 7 years, which thank you. I was like, what?
7 years is a slap to the face.
Is crazy.
That is like you're lucky to be alive.
Right. And I was like, it's attempted murder. Like he wasn't charged with attempted murder.
He should have been.
But he should have been.
Absolutely.
Like, and what else was he doing? Why else were we in my bed and why else was I covered in blood?
Yes.
And so that...
You are alive not because he gave mercy, but because you fought like hell and he gave up.
Thank you. That actually was something that came up at the end of the trial where the defense attorney's closing arguments were she's not, or she said something like he must not have wanted to rape her because he didn't rape her. And
it actually pisses me off so much that a woman said that.
I know.
I understand that it is her job.
Still.
But it's unfathomable that even if it's your job, that you would say that.
To say that.
With a victim sitting right there.
Exactly. And the prosecution or the DA had a rebuttal, and I wasn't in the room because it was COVID, but I guess she said she didn't survive because he chose not to rape her. She survived because she fought.
Yes.
Exactly like you said. But it's so frustrating. But the plea deal, I remember I was at work. I had gotten a new job and I was flustered and I was so like panicked, like, oh my God, he's going to get out on 5 years. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to go into hiding. What if I have children? Which also I think about now, and part of the reason why I haven't had children, what if he were to get out? They would be in danger. And I was in a flurry and drove down to the DA's office and just said, kept calling her and saying, I need to talk to you about this. And she was like, we're not considering it. And I was like, I just need to come talk to you about this. And I went down there and she said, we're not considering it. We're not considering it. They're pushing for 7 years, maybe 14 years. We're not considering it. And I was like, well, 1, why would you call me about it then? And 2, they kept saying, you don't want to go to trial. You definitely don't want to go to trial. It will cost the city so much money. It'll make so many people have to take time off their jobs. It's just a big production for everyone. We want to figure out how to do this without you going to trial. And also, you don't want to have to testify. That'll be hard on you. And I went down there that day.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
know.
This is just pissing me off so much. I am shocked.
Too expensive?
Oh, I'm sorry. My life is too expensive.
Do I give a fuck about that? Or people have to take time.
Oh, well, I've been paying taxes, so
yeah. This is what this is for, if anything, and it's so cut and dry in my case.
Yes, there's zero questions. The amount
Zero
of,
question.
I mean, that crime scene is a dream crime scene.
And they kept saying that. And they kept saying that. And they kept saying, this is like a dream, case in the sense that there is no way to enter any doubt here, even though it's so frustrating that in a lot of cases, there's places that people find ways to sow seeds of doubt. But it was if you're going to go to trial with any case, you would think it would be this one.
This is the gold star case.
Yes. And like
to be trying to convince a victim not to
it felt gaslighty too. Like, you don't want this. And I was like, oh no, I do. Like, one, I want to face him. And two, don't make it because you don't want me to have to testify.
Right. Don't tell me what I want.
Exactly.
I will tell you what I want.
Exactly.
That feels almost, and you hear this from a lot of victims, like re-traumatizing the process of like dealing with this for years after the fact. It gets dragged out, and there's all these ways in which people are just re-victimizing.
Completely. And it's also tremendously, like, I totaled up how much it cost to follow this thread, to go to trial to the point where he was sentenced to life in prison. For my family to take time off of work and to travel, for me to take time off of work. Parking at the courthouse is very expensive. Like, if you didn't have a car, if you were on the bus, if you had to get childcare, this would be like, there were days where during the trial where he would just refuse to come out of his cell. And so we would all sit there for a full day, and it would just be a full day wasted.
So they let him find more ways to control the narrative and control your life.
And stay in control of and have everyone's neck. You know what I mean? Is what it felt like. And he rightly so. I'm glad that he was deemed, what is it called? He did
unfit to stand trial.
Yeah, he was his angle, and it became clear that it was an angle through the trial. His angle was to try to get deemed unfit to stand trial. And so he had, I think, 5 competency hearings prior to the trial starting, which was also delays. But in every single competency hearing with different doctors, they found him competent. And so finally, we started the trial in October. I think it was Halloween, October of 2020. And I had seen him at the preliminary hearing for the first time. And it was odd. I was fascinated by him, like this person that has played such a big role in my life that I only knew for 13 minutes. So I was fascinated by watching him. And who is he? How does he move? What does he say? I was very protective of my mom being in the courtroom, and like got really in shape, like was like running every day, lifting weights every day, because I was just like, I want him to see me as a threat. I want to be incredibly capable if I need to fight him again, which is not rational. But I was like ready for war with him. But when I first saw him at the preliminary hearing, he said he was playing the that he wasn't competent role. But when he saw me, was like, that's not her. That's an actress. That's not Caroline. Who's that? That's an actress. And was saying weird things like that. And what else did he say?
That's not Caroline?
He was saying, that's not Caroline. And I was just sitting there like, what is he saying? And then he said, the judge was asking me about my injuries. And then he yelled, pull down your shirt. Show us your scars. And I was like, does he just get to just say stuff like that? Like, is this what happens at a trial? That you just let him say things like that to the people that they hurt? Like perpetrators just get to talk and say anything to the victim? Like, it was just bizarre to me that like he could sit and say things like, pull down your shirt and show us your scars in front of a whole room of police officers. It's like, how is this allowed? And it was really like, I think what was eye-opening to me is that it was judge to judge. Like, if you got a good judge, they would protect you, and because he was yelling things at me a lot. If you got a good judge, they would stop it and they would protect you. If you got a bad judge, they would let it happen and it would just continue. And I finally got a judge that said, it's clear that he's trying to intimidate the witness, and he's not going to continue to do that. And so they ended up removing him. And he like every day they gave him an opportunity to sit in on the trial. And every day he acted out so that he couldn't be there. But that day when he was saying about Caroline, as they were taking him out of the courtroom, he said to a bailiff, "How did I do? Do you think my performance was Oscar worthy?" And the bailiff told the judge, like, obviously. But the detective called. We were on our way home, and he was like, "You're not going to believe what he said to a bailiff." And it was like, okay, so he's playing a role.
Yeah.
But the trial itself was during COVID, so it was really kind of strange with everything being very separated by plastic and masks. I was really grateful that we were able to be in a courtroom instead of having to do it on video, which would have felt very surreal.
Well, and I could imagine would also create an imprinted trauma memory of wherever you did trial from, right? Like if you had to do that in your home,
right?
Now this home is tainted with this experience and this person.
Completely. And with how much we have to engage on video calls now on the computer, like to have done that. Is that a puppy?
Hi, baby. Elton says, we talked about how important dogs are for everybody, so I just want to come in and support.
You did a great job. You were very patient. Okay, what a boy. What a good boy. So I know you were talking about really scary stories.
He says, I can support.
He doesn't kiss?
No, he's not a licker.
Oh, yeah, so really in your hand. Oh, I just feel like dogs are sometimes like crazy intuitive.
They are. Oh, I'm honored, buddy.
He says, let me help. Let me kiss it better.
I love a kiss. Is he allowed to stay with you?
Yeah, he can stay if you're okay with it.
Oh my goodness. I'm in love.
We'll get some dog sound effects picked up in the mics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, good boy. But I wish you could have dogs in the courtroom. Like,
actually, my guide dog school does that.
Do they?
Yes, the dogs that don't make it to being a service dog, they repurpose to do specifically sexual assault victims, being able to have them in the courtroom with them. And they found something like 80% more convictions, particularly with children witnesses, because the children are able to tell the dog the story instead of look out and tell the court.
Which is so overwhelming and intimidating and scary.
Yeah. I wish every person who had to testify in a trial was able to have that.
I do too. I honestly think it would make such a difference because it is so intimidating, especially getting cross-examined. I was so scared and there's no prep. You know, it wasn't a civil case. And I didn't have a private attorney. So it wasn't my case. I was just a witness. And I, thinking about being cross-examined, I was like, are they going to go through my whole history, and like try to make me seem like a slut or try to make me seem like a liar? And I had read Chanel Miller's book, and have you read Chanel Miller's book?
I haven't.
She was raped at Stanford University, and the trial for her specifically was very traumatic in the sense that the media got involved. His attorneys were really aggressive and painted her in this really, like dismal light that was really damaging to her. It just was this nightmare scenario that she lived through. And so I had that in my mind, and going into the cross-examination, I think I was really terrified. And if I can give any advice to anyone that's going into something like that, it's just slow down, take a beat, listen to what they're saying. They're trying to lead you to a certainty that they've already defined. So every time they try to get you to agree with them, really think about whether or not what they're saying is exactly the way you would say it. Because that was what the defense attorney ultimately did, was she was trying to prove and get me to agree that primarily he was there to rob me and not to rape me. And so she kept saying things like, you said that mostly he was talking about money, right? And so I would have to respond with, he asked me for money at different points throughout the night, but I would not characterize it as mostly.
Mm.
Like just
The nuance of
sneaky.
phrase. Yes.
It's like sneaky ways of phrasing things to get you to agree. But ultimately, I testified. They presented all of the evidence, and he was found guilty. I remember going to the sentencing hearing with, I was able to do a victim impact statement. My dad did a victim impact statement. And then at the verdict reading, I was there with the detective. And I remember when they went through all of the charges, the jury was all staring at me to see my reactions. And they went one by one, guilty, 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 guilty. There was one that he was found not guilty, but guilty of a lesser charge, which is called mayhem. And it sounds very sinister. Like, aggravated mayhem is when you intentionally damage someone's body that would permanently disable them. And he was found guilty of mayhem, not aggravated mayhem, because I'm not able to get function back in my left arm and fingers. But they deemed it not, that he wasn't doing that, like
intentionally. That was okay.
Mm-hmm. And then he was sentenced to life in prison plus a few years. The actual sentencing hearing was my family and his family and me and him and the judge and the lawyers. And he came in and he was really disruptive and yelling, and so they ended up taking him out. But his dad spoke, his stepmom spoke, and a woman who he had been dating spoke. And then I spoke and my dad spoke, and we all expressed so much compassion and grief for what each other was going through. My dad talked to his dad and said, "I'm so sorry for what you're losing today." And both of his parents addressed me and said, "We're so sorry for what you've gone through and what you've had to survive." And ultimately, everyone on his side of the aisle was saying he's not a safe man.
Wow.
And he should not be free. But they were asking that he get treatment for mental health in prison, which I also hope that he is getting that. And I don't feel hatred or anything toward him or wish him to suffer or wish him pain. I know that he's not a safe man, and that for him to be free means that women are in danger. And ultimately, we have alerts now, my family and I, for when he gets moved from one prison to another. But for the most part, it feels like that chapter is closed, knock on wood. He's appealed, I think, twice, or his lawyers have appealed twice, and they haven't been able to find grounds for appeal. So I say to a lot of people, for all the stories that I've heard from women, mine feels like a fairy tale. Like, to be believed, for him to be caught, for him to be sentenced to life in prison is so rare, that I've absolutely suffered. And there's a lot of things, especially having to do with PTSD, that over time have gotten more challenging. And I think the only thing that I have started to feel more anger toward him about over time is that I'm 41, 41, I think now. And this happened when I was 32. And what I've started to feel more anger about recently toward him is lost time. That I've been focused on this and focused on surviving this, focused on him going to jail, focused on telling the story, focused on sharing it with women, focused on recovering, focused on, whatever, for now almost a decade of my life. And I see other people around me that have other things like a partner or a home or children or have advanced in their careers. And is it his fault? No. But I think it's the first time that I'm really allowing myself to grieve that I had to spend so much time focused on him. And the first layer that I'm sitting with, I think, is anger. But ultimately, like, it's such a, like I said, it's such an easy thing now for me to understand, like, what he did. Again, not condone, but understand what he did, that he faced a consequence, and that now it's over. That it's not the thing that, like, keeps me up at night. It's more so the betrayal from the relationship that I was in and how that played out afterward, that it has the ripple effect into now where it's really confusing, and just still hard to navigate. But, and too, like, coming to terms with how I handled it afterward. And, like, I saw how scared people were when I was having these moments of, like, after the attack, I was really quick to rage, for example. Like, it was like rage was right under the surface. Tears were right under the surface. Terror was right under the surface. All these really big emotions were like a hair away from being right there. And I remember seeing how frightened people were of me then. And that relational stuff and how you fit into a social group. And am I broken? Am I marked? Am I different than everyone? Too different to be accepted ever again? Am I dangerous for people to be around? There's all of these things that now I still feel like I'm dealing with. And it's just such a, you wouldn't think coming out of something like that would be what you're sitting with. You would think it would be being scared of strangers or being scared of parking garages or being scared of someone being at the door. And it's really not been that. And I'm very private about my home. Like, I have a hard time letting people into my apartment that aren't family. But the other side of things, like the way you're received after something like that plays such a big role in imprinting how you look at yourself moving forward. Like, am I good or bad? Am I acceptable and lovable, or am I rejectable? Am I am I someone that people will be able to see in their totality and still love? And that has been, I think, the bigger challenge. I feel like in 2020 was when I started to really feel like I was learning about what was happening to me from seeing other people talk about it on TikTok or on YouTube. But before that, I felt like I was grasping at straws, like, what's happening to me? Yeah.
Yes, floating in this, like, unknown. I feel like a huge part of my healing from many different things in my life was the unlock of understanding, like, what is actually happening to me.
Yes.
Like, literally, like, learning the mechanics of an anxiety attack. Like,
Yes.
what's happening in my body when I feel this way?
Yeah.
Or
that's creating this perception or this, like, feeling.
Exactly. And being able to connect dots in my life of, like, why is this moment bringing up this feeling? Oh, it's because of this previous moment I lived through. And finding community who understand which for so many of us with unique life experiences is only possible through the internet.
Only possible. I'm
It's-
so glad you said that.
It's really the only place we can find each other.
Yeah.
It is so healing. I remember when I was in the depths of my PTSD and struggling to rebuild and had just lost my guide dog, like the only safe space I could find was a support group for people who had lost guide dogs. And it's like, this is such a niche experience.
Yeah.
And like finding people who had that experience and gotten through it to the other side and could like tell me how they did it, like give me their roadmap. And it didn't mean it would work for me, but it meant there was a version that worked for someone.
Yeah.
And if there was a version that worked for somebody, maybe there was a version I could find that would work for me.
Yeah.
And it was just like having that hope of community that was further along on their journey than I was on my own was so helpful. And it's really what I want this show to be for people.
And it is. And it is. And the community aspect, I've just struggled so much at times with feeling like a monster. Like that's the word in my mind. Like I'm a monster because the people in my life have never been in a violent home invasion with a stalker who wanted to kill them and survived it. You know, like they don't know exactly what I'm going through. And so they're doing their best to try to be there for me. But until you are able to find community, and I remember looking for a support group when I was struggling, and I was like, I feel like I don't fit in the domestic violence group. I don't fit in the rape group. I don't fit in the veterans group. You know, like I was trying to find like, where do I fit? And I didn't feel like I fit anywhere because a lot of the things that I struggled with had to do with the violence, because the violence was the most pronounced aspect of that night for me. And genuinely, the place that I've found the most community has been since I started telling my story on social media. And I had prepared I didn't know what to expect when I was going to start to share. And I didn't think people were going to pay attention the way that they did. I thought I was going to have to post for a long time for people to pay attention. But I also thought I didn't know if it was going to be a lot of men criticizing me or, saying things like in my comment section. So I was preparing for that. And I was preparing to have to convince people of what happened with my ex and that he was, that he was lying because he had done some things after the attack, that now I understand. And I can't say that he's a narcissist or not, but from talking to people and talking to therapists, understand that what I experienced afterward was a narcissistic discard with a smear campaign. So it was like after the attack, I required a ton of attention and care, and I was the hero. And that was something he didn't want. And so instead of just us separating, he told people things like, we were never really together. Like I was just with her because I felt sorry for her. She was abusive to me is a big one that has stuck with me, that I was so terrified when he said that, am I an abuser? And he was going to my therapy appointments with me. So he was convincing my therapist, and he was calling my dad twice a week, telling my dad these things. He convinced all of our friends. I even would show up at his house with a box of pictures and magnets from trips we'd taken. Are you telling me this isn't real, that none of these things happened? And he would look at me like, oh, you're imagining things. It was him repainting reality when I was so vulnerable. Him repainting reality in any scenario would be disorienting. But because I was so vulnerable and because I was so raw and erratic, I think people believed it more, were more apt to believe it because they were like, well, she's kind of scary right now. So maybe she could have been an abuser to you, or she's walking around in loops. Maybe you did feel bad for her and that's why you were dating her. But I think, that relationship being so confusing I don't remember where I was going with this. Where did we start? Now that I started talking about it, I'm like, ah.
I also don't even remember where we started.
Yeah.
We were talking about like finding your people and how
Finding
hard
your
it is, and that you
people.
found your people through sharing on social media, which
Yeah.
I completely
Thank you. Good
relate to,
memory.
because
Yes.
that's how I found my people.
You did.
Was like, I kind of had to put out the bat signal,
Yeah.
and that's how I found the people
That's
who understood
beautiful.
me the most. And
Yes.
I'm happy that that's how that's happened for you as well.
I was not expecting it, and that was exactly what happened. It was like I posted on social media, and immediately women were commenting, asking questions, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." And then they were saying like, "Oh my god, I don't know. We want to know more. We want to know more." And when I started talking about the relationship, I was thinking everyone's going to think I'm a bad guy. They're going to believe him, and I'm going to have to convince them that what I'm saying is real. But it was like the very first post I said, like, I was in this relationship and he started saying these things in my comment section. All the women were like, this is a narcissist. This is a smear campaign. He's dropping you because of this. And I was like, they all clocked it so much faster.
And isn't that how it
I
is? Like, it's
did.
so much easier to see it when you're
When it's
sitting with a
not
friend
you.
and they're talking about their partner, and you're like, girl, this isn't right. But it's so hard to see it when you're in it.
Yes.
Because you're too close to it.
Too close to it. And you've already been kind of drawn down the manipulative rabbit hole. And so
Yes.
that being believed by women about this relationship was also a really healing moment for me, because it was like en masse, everyone, of course, they're only hearing my side of things, but like everyone was like, this is what it is. This is what happened. And I was just like, oh my God, you guys completely get it. And I don't have to explain myself or
Convince
try to prove
you.
it to
Yeah.
you. And yeah, it just, to me, I've felt this sense of community and belonging from connecting with the community on social media. And like, it's such a high value relationship to me now. And I just don't think there's any other way to find it. And I'm very thankful for that I was able to find it. And I think it's really meaningful if you are feeling lost, to think about, if you're comfortable with sharing publicly your story, there's a lot of value in being able to connect with other women. Like, it's scary because you're inviting in people's opinions and criticism potentially, which I feel thankful that I haven't really had to battle with that. But you're also inviting in like a wave of other people that have gone through, if not the exact same thing as you, something similar, something relatable, and they want to connect. And we all want to connect with each other, which is, oh my God, like, game changer.
I'm so glad that sharing your story and your voice has been empowering for you, and you found that community through that. And it has helped you in many ways, but you have equally, in sharing your story and being so vulnerable, have helped so many women. And one thing that you said much earlier in our conversation really stood out to me, and I want to bring it back there. You mentioned that during your attack, you thought about these big, strong, I think you called them your tree trunk legs.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us women, we want to be dainty and we
Yeah.
want to be slim, and we view that as being feminine.
Wafy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I was always held my weight in my thighs. That's just always been my body type.
Yeah.
And I was always an athletic build where I
Yeah.
had muscle and I built muscle easily. And I remember so often feeling so much shame about that. And what I love is the way you phrased it is like, that was your power.
Yes.
That was what helped you survive. And following the injuries, you've had to do so much reckoning with your body. And that it was both what helped you survive, but it's also what carries so much of your story with you still today. And how you've, did things like get into running and becoming as strong and fit as you could to feel safe. I'm wondering, what other ways did you go about rebuilding and reclaiming your life? What changes did you make in your life to feel safe living alone again, or
Yeah.
maybe starting to date? Like, what advice would you give to women who've been through a situation that has altered their reality and the way they view things to begin to rebuild their own lives? What helped you?
That was so thoughtfully and beautifully said, what you said about our bodies and how we look at them. And I I definitely felt that way about my body, and so thankful for, I think, women, that have like big hips and big legs potentially, or feel more muscular, or feel more athletic. These are the times when you thank your body for things like that. Like, oh, thank God my big, like, athletic, strong thighs were able to kick this 6'2" man off of me. Like, that's remarkable. And I love my body so much for being able to do that. I now am a boxer, so I box and like do boxing training. I don't compete doing boxing, but for me, it's more just like I like to feel the rhythm of my body being very capable, and also being able to just kind of remind myself of my agency and how powerful I am. It's, to me, like when I'm boxing or running, or, doing something where I'm using my body to exercise my agency, um, to me, it grounds me in a really meaningful way, in remembering how strong and capable I am in a physical way, which I'm so grateful for. But I think, as far as, reclaiming my sense of safety and feeling safe in my home, and moving through the world in a way that I feel comfortable, I think I do a lot of reframing in my mind, where there was a point in my recovery when I was struggling with PTSD where um, there was a parable that I learned, that was a Taoist farmer. Um, I think it starts like his prize horse runs away, and then the next day the horse comes back and brings, and his neighbor says, "I'm so sorry, that you lost your horse." And the farmer says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" And then the next day, his prize horse comes back and he brings more horses with him. And now the farmer has 6 horses. And the neighbor comes over and says, "I'm so glad for your fortune, your good fortune, and that you have your horses back and you have all these new horses." And the farmer says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" Then, his son is riding one of the horses and breaks his arm. Again, the neighbor comes over and says, "I'm so sorry about your son." Farmer says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" And then the army comes to take his son away to go to war. And because his arm is broken, they don't take him. And again, the farmer says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" And I think your mind is so powerful in either it either will paint your reality as hopeless, or you can influence your mind to work in your favor. In my experience, through pushing yourself to look at things differently, to me, is the very first step. So for me, when I was stuck in my despair, and I still do get trapped in despair now and again, it's not like it's gone away or it's non-existent for me. It's something I have to be mindful of a lot. Despair, or it's not fair, or things like that. What I will do is kind of zoom out on things and think about the entirety of my life, and how one thing that maybe you didn't want to happen can lead to another, and lead to another, and lead to another. And like the farmer said, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" And I've experienced, because of my attack, so much, I've built so much inner strength. I've been able to reach and connect with and help so many people. I've been able to empathize with and understand experiences that I would have never been able to understand. And I just see in all of these very scary experiences that we can feel as human beings, there's always what the farmer is referencing. There's always these ebbs and flows that come throughout our lives in what is good and what is bad. And you never know, which moments, even though they're scary or terrifying or feel unsurvivable, what will lead to another. And sometimes it's an extended period where you're like, the horse just keeps running away. Like I'm not seeing this good fortune coming my way. But that mindset to look at things in a way that you can kind of step outside of the situation and walk around this experience in its entirety and say, there's terrifying things here, but there's also incredibly moving and powerful, empowering things here, to me is what has helped me continue. And when I was at the bottom of the well, allowed me to climb out.
Thank you for sharing that. Your resilience and your strength are so evident in everything you say and in simply your presence. It's been such an honor to have this conversation, and your willingness to share. I just have so much gratitude for you because it will help so many people, and you already have helped so many people. I want to ask a question that I know might be on many people's minds. I call this the awkward question. It's a question people might want to ask, but might feel too scared to ask it.
Oh, I love this. Yay.
You are a true crime story.
Mm-hmm.
True crime is a very popular genre in podcasting, documentaries, television series, and has been for a long time. I mean, shows like 48 Hours or 2020, Dateline, these have been going for decades at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And the main consumer of them is women.
Mm-hmm.
I myself am a major consumer of this kind of content. And I think for me and for a lot of other women I've talked to who consume this kind of content, they seem to share the same reason. And for me, the reason is almost, and it sounds morbid, but like
Research.
it feels like I'm preparing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I know all the things that could happen,
Mm-hmm.
if I know all the ways this could pan out,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm prepared.
Yeah.
But I am also acutely aware that there are ways to respectfully share these stories, and there is ways to sensationalize them.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways that center the victim or the survivor, and there are ways that center the perpetrator.
Yeah.
As somebody who is the type of person whose story is told on podcasts or would be in a Dateline episode, what is your opinion on true crime?
That's a great question. I think it's a very nuanced environment as far as for instance, Tara Newell, if you're familiar with Tara Newell, and her story, she's someone that I was lucky enough to get connected with and have dinner with before I started sharing on social media and sharing my story more publicly. And she has experienced, obviously her story has been told in media, her story has been told in podcasts, and it's being told third party. And she's a character in her own story, and she doesn't have authorship, and she doesn't get to approve how she's portrayed, and she doesn't get, she doesn't share in the like financial side of the successes of those things. And that propelled me, that conversation propelled me to start to share my story myself. So that was what propelled me to do my podcast and then want to write my book, share things on social media, to define that authorship before someone else could come in and take it from me. Because I can see, if it were me, how frustrated I would be if some major media, company informed me that they would be telling my story without my consent, without my approval, and without my authorship. And I think for so many women that have survived an experience like this, that is the experience that they have. I and to me, that's more about like women who have survived these stories having a share of those exact things, authorship, having agency, being a part of the process. That to me makes it feel a lot more ethical than the story being told and sensationalized as it will be without these real women's stories, voices being a part of the story. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that. Like Elizabeth Smart, I know has shared her story fairly recently and been, at the forefront of being able to shape what that looks like and the message that she wants to have, which for all of us is beyond like the scary man and, like you said, centering the man in the story and the person who caused all of this pain and destruction, which we're all fascinated with, myself included. And when it has been told historically, it's always the man is the center and the women are, like I was saying before, what I call reduced to paper doll characters.
She lit up the room.
She had such
She had-
potential.
Yes, all of these copy-paste generic remarks.
Mm-hmm. That just reduce women down to an archetype.
Yep.
That's pleasing for a story like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when women are at the forefront of having authorship of their own stories, we're telling a more complete and complex story that is much more about the human cost, which there's kind of a titillating kind of sensationalizing way that there's this all-powerful man that preys on these poor, helpless women. There's something kind of like pervasive in all of the ways that this used to be portrayed without women having a voice on the way that it's told, where I think it becomes a lot scarier when you can hear the human cost from someone and learn about them as a real human being. It comes a lot closer to home, and it feels more like that could be my sister, that could be my best friend, that could be me. And I think that's why there's a hesitance in media to give these women real, fully embodied selves, because it makes it too scary to watch.
We can no longer other
Exactly.
them.
Where they're
Yes.
just a flattened picture of a beautiful girl and how sad.
Yeah.
And so I'm also fascinated by true crime, and I ingest these stories, even like both in Tara's story and mine. We both referenced our third, what did you say?
Third man effect.
Our third man effect fed us things that we had seen. So hers was Walking Dead. So she had been a fan of the show The Walking Dead, and in The Walking Dead, you have to stab the zombies in the head to make them die. And that was like how she defeated the man who attacked her, was she stabbed him in the head the way that you would in The Walking Dead, and that saved her life. For me, it was a scene from Dexter that I had seen, a fictional scene on TV. And so there's a lot to be said about the validity of women knowing that men are their greatest threat and their primary predator, and ingesting these stories to try to prevent or feel prepared for what could happen. That you may see something in a film or in a documentary or hear something in a podcast that does save your life. And I think having a balance of like the centering on the man, because it is fascinating, psychopaths, sociopaths, it's terrifying, chilling, and something that I am endlessly fascinated by to learn how to avoid. But then also having this balance of women being able to tell real stories about what it was really like from a human-centered perspective. to me, it's just having the balance and not letting what used to be, which was just the man's story, outweigh the women's stories. Because we deserve to be humanized, and we deserve to be embodied, and we deserve to be real, flawed, complex, individual people. And I honestly, like, the more I'm very much in favor of women taking in things that scare them to feel more prepared if something were to ever happen to them. Because mental prep, it to me is so much more, and not obsession and not hypervigilance, but just knowing how far you're willing to go to protect yourself, not someone. And with women, I always want to just push women, like, we're always told it's right and okay and palatable to protect your children or to protect your family or to protect someone else, where we very often see in media a woman fighting just to protect herself with violence. And in my mind, be just sitting down for 5 minutes and thinking through and visualizing what you're willing to do to protect yourself. And if a situation were to ever be violent, and just saying to yourself, I am willing to kill someone to save my own life. This is what it would look like. This is what it would feel like, which feels awful, but I would be willing to do it. And then letting it go, to me, is better prep than boxing, because there are no rules in a fight for your life, which is something I say often. It's not a boxing match. You're not facing someone of your own weight class. There's no rules. There's no ref. So everything is a weapon. Someone who's 4'11" can defeat someone who's 6'5" because there are no rules. So to me, I don't see true crime as like a sickness or like damaging or anything like that. And I also don't think that it's unethical. I think it's important. But having diversity in authorship and being able to set boundaries for yourself to know, am I sitting in obsession when it comes to this because of my fear? Or am I choicefully ingesting this to feel more prepared? I think is, to me, a helpful lens.
I spent a lot of my younger years not realizing the vulnerability I was in, particularly around being a disabled woman, when it came to online dating, when it came to getting intoxicated at parties. I did not realize the increased risk I was at, and the knowing the statistics and being informed made me make different choices that kept me safe moving forward. And I think it's so important to have these conversations. And it's never for me about putting fear into disabled women.
Right.
But it's to say, I would like you to be aware of your increased risk, because when you're aware, you make different choices.
And you can prepare. I fully agree with you too about like, it's just the reality, that we need to be prepared. And to be informed is to be prepared. And at the same time, I'm so angry that we have to be.
Yeah.
As far as following me, I've been on a little bit of a social hiatus, but I've been in kind of a mental health low period. But I'm coming back on social media. I'm been working on myself, working in therapy. And my social media handles on TikTok are Hey Miss Collins. On Instagram, it's the same Hey Miss Collins. And on YouTube, Hey Miss Collins. And then if you want to listen to my podcast, that is Extraordinary, a firsthand story of survival, and available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Thank you so much. You're such a light in this world. I appreciate you having this conversation with me. And thank you all for listening. And now you know what it's really like.